There were several other speakers that evening, but the child's simple testimony had punctured the rhetorical balloon that the king's ministers had tried to inflate. The people were backing the anti-Dragonists, and at the end of the evening, even the king had come to recognize the reason and humanity of their cause. In his closing statement, he simply said, "Let's do it." As the news spread, celebrations erupted in the streets. Those who had been campaigning for the anti-Dragonists toasted each other and drank to the future of humanity. The next morning, 1 billion people woke up and realized that their turn to be sent to the dragon would come before the projectile could be completed. Whereas before, active support for the anti-Dragonist cause had been limited to a small group of visionaries, it now became the #1 priority and concern on everybody's mind. The abstract notion of the general will took on an almost tangible intensity and concreteness. Mass rallies raised money for the projectile project and urged the king to increase the level of state support. The king responded to these appeals. In his New Year address, he announced that he would pass an extra appropriations bill to support the project at a high level of funding. Additionally, he would sell off his summer castle and some of his land and make a large personal donation. "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of freeing the world from the ancient scourge of the dragon Tyrant." Thus started a great technological race against time. The concept of an anti-dragon projectile was simple, but to make it a reality required solutions to 1,000 smaller technical problems, each of which required dozens of time-consuming steps and missteps. Test missiles were fired but fell dead to the ground or flew off in the wrong direction. In one tragic accident, a wayward missile landed on a hospital and killed several hundred patients and staff. But there was now a real seriousness of purpose, and the tests continued even as the corpses were being dug out from the debris. Despite almost unlimited funding and round-the-clock work by the technicians, the king's deadline could not be met. The deadline concluded, and the dragon was still alive and well, but the effort was getting closer. A prototype missile had been successfully test-fired. Production of the core, made of the expensive composite material, was on schedule for its completion to coincide with the finishing of the fully tested and debugged missile shell into which it was to be loaded. The launch date was set to the following year's New Year's Eve, exactly 12 years after the project's official inauguration. The best-selling Christmas gift that year was a calendar that counted down the days to time 0, the proceeds going to the projectile project. The king had undergone a personal transformation from his earlier frivolous and thoughtless self. He now spent as much time as he could in the laboratories and the manufacturing plants, encouraging the workers and praising their toil. Sometimes he would even bring a sleeping bag and spend a night on a noisy machine floor. He even studied and tried to understand the technical aspects of their work, yet he confined himself to giving moral support and refrained from meddling in technical or managerial matters. 7 days before New Year, the woman who had made a case for the project almost 12 years earlier and was now its chief executive came to the royal castle and requested an urgent audience with the king. When the king got her note, he excused himself to the foreign dignitaries whom he was reluctantly entertaining at the annual Christmas dinner and hurried off to a private room where the scientist was waiting. As always of late, she looked pale and worn from her long working hours. This evening, however, the king also thought he could detect a ray of relief and satisfaction in her eyes. She told him that the missile had been deployed, the core had been loaded, everything had been triple-checked, they were ready to launch, and would the king give his final go-ahead. The king sank down in an armchair and closed his eyes. He was thinking hard. By launching the projectile tonight, 1 week early, 700,000 people would be saved. Yet, if something went wrong, if it missed its target and hit the mountain instead, it would be a disaster. A new core would have to be constructed from scratch, and the project would be set by some 4 years. He sat there silently for almost an hour. Just as the scientist had become convinced that he had fallen asleep, he opened his eyes and said in a firm voice, "No, I want you to go right back to the lab. I want you to check and then recheck everything again." The The scientist could not help a sigh escaping her, but she nodded and left. The last day of the year was cold and overcast, but there was no wind, which meant good launch conditions. The sun was setting. Technicians were scuttling around, making the final adjustments and giving everything one last check. The king and his closest advisors were observing from a platform close to the launch pad. Further away, behind the fence, large numbers of the public had assembled to witness the great event. A large clock was showing the countdown. 50 minutes to go. An advisor tapped the king on the shoulder and drew his attention to the fence. There was some tumult. Somebody had apparently jumped the fence and was running toward the platform where the king sat. Security quickly caught up with him. He was handcuffed and taken away. The king turned his attention back to the launch pad and to the mountain in the background. In front of it, he could see the dark, slumped profile of the dragon. It was eating. Some 20 minutes later, the king was surprised to see the handcuffed man reappearing a short distance from the platform. His nose was bleeding, and he was accompanied by 2 sturdy security guards. The man appeared to be in a frenzied state. When he spotted the king, he began shouting at the top of his lungs, "The last train! The last train! Stop the last train!" "Who is this young man?" said the king. "His face seems familiar, but I can't quite place him. What does he want? Let him come up." The young man was a junior clerk in the Ministry of Transportation, and the reason for his frenzy was that he had discovered that his father was on the last train to the mountain. The king had ordered the train traffic to continue, fearing that any disruption might cause the dragon to stir and leave the open field in front of the mountain, where it now spent most of its time. The young man begged the king to issue a recall order for the last train, which was due to arrive at the mountain terminal 5 minutes before time zero. "I cannot do it," said the king. "I cannot take the risk." "But the trains frequently run 5 minutes late. The dragon won't notice. Please." The young man was kneeling before the king, imploring him to save his father's life and the lives of the other 1,000 passengers on board that last train. The king looked down at the pleading, bloodied face of the young man, but he bit his lip and shook his head. The young man continued to wail, even as the guards carried him off the platform. "Please stop the train! Please!" The king stood silent and motionless until, after a while, the wailing suddenly ceased. The king looked up and glanced over at the countdown clock. 5 minutes remaining. 4 minutes. 3 minutes. 2 minutes. The last technician left the launch pad. 30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10. 9. 8. As a ball of fire enveloped the launch pad and the missile shot out, the spectators instinctively rose to the tips of their toes, and all eyes fixated at the front end of the white flame from the rocket's afterburners heading towards the distant mountain. The masses, the king, the low and the high, the young and the old, it was as if at this moment they shared a single awareness, a single conscious experience, that white flame shooting into the dark, embodying the human spirit, its fears and its hope, striking at the heart of evil. The silhouette on the horizon tumbled and fell. 1,000 voices of pure joy rose from the assembled masses, joined seconds later by the deafening drawn-out thud from the collapsing monster, as if Earth itself was drawing a sigh of relief. After centuries of oppression, humanity at last was free from the cruel tyranny of the dragon. The joy cry resolved itself into a jubilant chant, "Long live the king! Long live us all!" The king's advisor, like everybody that night, were as happy as children. They embraced each other and congratulated the king. "We did it! We did it!" But the king answered in a broken voice, "Yes, we did it. We killed the dragon today. But damn, why did we start so late? This could have been done 5, maybe 10 years ago. Millions of people wouldn't have had to die." The king stepped off the platform and walked up to the young man in handcuffs who was sitting on the ground. There he fell down on his knees. "Forgive me. Oh my God, please forgive me.